science fiction for?
In the three-body problem, the Trisolarans have three of these near their world, and it's bad for them, so they're coming here. Matt.
What's stars?
Yes, stars or suns.
That was LeVar Burton, also known as Geordi LaForge from Star Trek The Next Generation, asking a question from the three-body problem on last week's Jeopardy! And this is Rehydrate. This season, we'll be reading and discussing Liu Cixin's Death's End, the third and final part of the Remembrance of Earth's Past series. This is Season 5, Episode 4, The Storyless Kingdom, covering the first half of Part 3. We've previously talked about the three-body problem, the Dark Forest, and the hosts have a varying level of knowledge of this book and this series. My name is Dan, and I've read the entire series.
This is Tim, and I'm new to the series and have only read up to this current week's reading.
This is Amin, and I've read up to this week's reading, but also along with Dan and Talia, and this week special guest co-host Priya, I co-host the Rehydrate spoiler cast, where we talk about all of the things for people who have not read all of this. So if you read the entire series or don't care about spoilers, you should check that out as well.
And like Amin mentioned, we have a special guest this week as well. Priya, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, my name is Priya, and I've read all of the books in this series, and I have a background in English literature, so I'm really excited to pick apart the fairy tales.
Awesome. Thank you very much for joining.
Thank you.
So this week we do have a lot of follow-up, more follow-up than we've ever had before. So I'm just going to dive into it. First thing is, I forgot to mention this last week, but there is another quote-unquote podcast around the three-body problem, which is being released on Spotify, I think, or maybe it's just on Spotify. Anyway, but it seems to be a group that is publishing audiobooks as kind of broken up into individual episodes. It's not doing analysis on the book like we are. It's not really a competition, I guess, so we'll give them a plug. But it's cool that they're putting it out there, and I encourage people to listen to it. When I read the three-body problem for the first time, I didn't actually read it. I listened to the audiobook, and I think that's a pretty interesting experience. So I'll put a link into the notes there. Another thing I found on Reddit was actually someone mentioned that the three-body problem reminded them of a Futurama episode that's called My Three Sons. And I was like, how did I not remember that? Like, the planet is literally called Trisol. So I'm going to put a link to there, but I just thought that was funny that I forgot about that.
Oh, God, those are the water people, right? Yeah, he drinks the king.
Yeah, and he hydrates. And I don't know how, my whole brain is like around Futurama, so I don't know how I didn't put that together. Especially the planet's called literally Trisol. So anyway.
Yeah, and that episode probably predated the publication of the first book, even in China or something, by like 4 years or something.
It probably came out in like the 90s, I think, I would guess, like late 90s. And I think the book wasn't published until 2008 in China. So maybe Liu Cixin got his idea from Futurama.
I've never watched Futurama, so I just read the summary of the episode, and I was like, what?
You should watch it. It's great.
I know. It sounds very interesting.
Yeah. Did you watch The Simpsons?
A little bit, like here and there.
Okay. Yeah. So it's the same creator who created The Simpsons. He forked off a series that it's a similar art style, but like kind of a similar humor style. But it's set in space. It's 3,000 or 1,000 years into the future.
Okay.
Yeah. And then like it's just kind of wacky adventures of a guy who hibernated. Actually, it's another thing. A guy hibernates for 1,000 years. So yeah, obviously I fully recommend Futurama to all our listeners.
Got it.
Next thing is we got a couple emails from some listeners. Frank, who has emailed us a bunch of times, had some really interesting thoughts, and he had a couple of long emails, and I wanted to kind of condense a little bit down and kind of think about one of his points, because one of the most contentious points, like I mentioned last time, is the Changxin's her responsibility for what happens based off of her not activating deterrence. And so I think Frank had some interesting thoughts here. So bear with me. It's kind of a long email, but I'm going to read it here. I always appreciate the discussion about whether Changxin is to blame for the failure of deterrence. My take is that the blame is to be shared by both Changxin as well as the world government who allowed Changxin to be elected by the general public. The host had touched upon this, but I don't think the point was made explicitly. The successful storeholder should not even go into the step of asking the question, will I have the courage to push the button if the Trisolarans attack. By the nature of ultimate deterrence, if the enemy attacks, the battle is already lost. And whether he would summon the courage to push the button afterwards is merely whether he could salvage something out of a bigger failure to meet the strategic objective of maintaining deterrence. The right question here to ask is, will I be able to make the Trisolarans believe that I will press the button if they attack? The better sword holder can make the Trisolarans believe this, and more likely deterrence will work. In this light, one might even say whether the sword holder will even push the button after the enemy attacks is irrelevant to the strategic objectives of peace. Like, Frank, I really appreciate your stuff, but we have a lot of material to cover. But I just thought like his perspective here around how she was already set up for failure by humanity, like just kind of being more lackadaisical and not really considering the Trisolarans to be a threat is like that. I think that lends even more that I still don't think she's at fault for that happening. I don't know. Does that lead any more? Does that add any more color to you guys, or have any additional thoughts on it?
Yeah, I don't think mine has changed at all. I think I said last episode that, again, I think she was just kind of put in an impossible situation, and that given the information at hand, it felt that, yeah, she was set up for failure, and that it's like I would have made the same decision as her. So
I think it also speaks to kind of like the state of being in a lull that people have fallen into during this period of time, kind of not knowing what sort of state of mind Loji has been in, because he's been kind of hidden away from the rest of the world. So I guess they don't grasp the seriousness of what he had to do. So they can't possibly envision what they need, what like qualities and traits they need in a new sword holder to sort of uphold the same level of deterrence as what Loji was offering. And also, when you start to play the blame game, it sort of just goes all the way back to, well, then the blame really lies with Ye Wenji for broadcasting the signal in the first place. So,
right.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's a good point. How would they even know what to replace or what they're replacing? He's such a black box at that point. Like they really had no insight as to what sort of person would make an effective sword holder.
Right, and they stop even believing that position is even necessary. Right, like they're like, oh, we're good now. They're giving us cool movies, whatever. So
right, it's just to them, it's just a symbolic position at that point. It's like the Queen of England or something. We don't really need it. We just need someone to fulfill this role.
We got also another email from another person who has emailed us a couple times, named Rob, and he talked more about the 4-dimensional stuff and how they would film it. And he says, like you've said, some of the difficult stuff to put on the screen is definitely how to show the dimensionality to the audiences. But I also love to think about how they're going to do other parts of the book too. In book 1, at the end of Trisolarus, chapters are a big reveal, and I wonder how they're going to show these chapters on the TV screen. Like, does a bunch of Trisolarans communicate by light, flickering really fast with English subtitles? Are they actually going to show the aliens physically? Then in book 3, you guys are going to read the fairy tales next, which I wonder how they're going to do it too. Having a bunch of government officials sitting around reading the story, which is with no visuals, would be pretty boring. Lastly, as a spoiler, I'm going to skip that one. Those are some of the most interesting and best parts of the 3 books, and I wonder if they're going to be hard to film. I don't know, maybe I'm just uncreative and thinking about how they could do it. If it's left out of the TV show, it'd be a letdown to me. Me too. Like, if they don't have the fairy tale stuff in there and they don't do like some really outside the box thinking, it's going to be very, very disappointing. I can't say how they would just totally skip it though. Yeah, like the 4-dimensional stuff, I think is going to be really, really difficult to film, and hopefully they're putting their best minds towards how they're going to do it. And Rob also mentions something that I've been kind of hesitant to bring back up. I brought it back up on season 1 when we were talking about the Sophon chapters, but I've been, especially with the 4D stuff, I was hesitant to bring up Flatland again, just to not introduce dimensionality as a potential spoiler. But now we're kind of past that. I recommend everyone watch read Flatland, and there's also a movie that is on YouTube that dramatizes that story.
Yeah, I think the story, the fairy tale episode, if they have an episode about it, is I can see that ending up being a strange sort of bottle episode that ends up being the highly controversial episode of the season.
Yeah,
where it's like like some people love it, some people hate it. I'm starting to think about the TV show The Leftovers, and there's this one episode called International Assassin where the main character just goes on this strange, like head trip journey
Yeah.
that is like completely disassociated from the rest of the series. And I think of something like that for this, like how they might go about doing this.
Even then, the main character is still the main character in that one. It's just totally in a totally different setting.
Sure,
But yeah,
yeah.
I mean, I love that whole show and then that episode specifically. So I would be happy if they pulled something like that. How did you think about it? Did you like it or did you not like it?
Oh, that episode, yes, I loved it. Yeah, I liked the show, and I think that show is like experimental enough in some of how it does things that it might be a good reference point for maybe how to do some things, at least narratively. Maybe not specifically with this tale, but this section, but the story as a whole, because it does have such a odd, like lurching narrative.
I was also thinking back to how I think I watched it so long ago, but in one of the final movies of Harry Potter, sorry, I'm a big Harry Potter nerd. They have when they tell the story of the Deathly Hallows, which is kind of like a fairy tale within the overall plot. They sort of depict the visuals as sort of like animation, but like a really cool kind of animation. So like what I actually want to see is like I want to see like real people play these roles of the characters in the fairy tales, but like I can also envision a scenario where like there's some animation to depict some of the more mystical elements of the fairy tales that are might be harder to depict with like realistic elements, I guess, if that makes sense.
That's a pretty realistic possibility. Now they mentioned it, making it like an anime style, or just like, even though it's specifically because it's a fairy tale, like animation style is makes more kind of sense thematically. I think for those, I hope they do it also in live action. But I could see fairy tales, the animation working for the fairy tale section.
Yeah, almost like a Kill Bill type thing. The
Yeah,
animated
I thought about that
sequence
too.
with, yeah. In fact, I also rewatched that movie recently, and there are some odd like parallels I drew to the narrative style of this too, where it's just like there's a lot of in Tarantino's movies in general take these strange sojourns, sometimes just to depict this part, like the animated part in Kill Bill. Like it's not entirely necessary for the story, and he doesn't give any of the other people that the bride is hunting down the same like screen time, but for whatever reason just almost seems like on a whim just decided to have this animated sequence. And sometimes like I kind of feel parallels to the story here where the narrative pauses and it kind of focuses on these things that
Yeah, I get you. It's it's like kind of like side stories, right? Just like world building side stories.
Yeah, just kind of like it's kind of inserted into the narrative at strange times.
By the way, when you guys referred to, I think in a past podcast, you said that you envisioned at this point Luo Ji as the character from Kill Bill, her master, her teacher. I was like, oh my gosh, that's exactly how I envisioned him too. That seems to be like the unanimous like way people see Luo Ji, it seems.
I can just see Luo Ji like like flicking his beard,
Yeah. That's so spot on.
All right, well, let's get into the summary for this very long, consequential part of this story. Humanity tries to get back to normal after the events of the Great Resettlement, and Changxin hibernates for 5 years to give time to restore her vision. During that time, AA rapidly builds up the business. During the intervening years, humanity starts to question the validity of the dark force itself, and thinking that the Trisolarans might be suffering from delusions of cosmic persecution. That thinking is quickly reversed as Earth sees one of the stars of Trisolaris get hit with a photoid attack and destroys Trisolaris itself, with only 1/1000th of the population able to survive. Sofan invites Changxin and Luo Ji to tea at her house again. During the now famous conversation of the Way of Tea, Sofan reveals the Dark Forest strikes are done in the most economical fashion. For example, on Trisolarans, no reconnaissance was done, and the attacking civilization just used the power of its own star against its own system. Escape is the only means of survival. During the conversation, Sofan has to be careful about what information they're willing to give out, but out of respect to Luo Ji, she agrees to answer one question entirely truthfully. Luo Ji asks if there's a way to broadcast a cosmic safety notice, to which Sofan responds, yes. While humanity splits into factions on how to send such a safety notice, Changxin becomes despondent to the point where she contemplates suicide. Sofan has another message for her that will change the course of history. Yuan Tianming would like to see you. Chung-Chin travels to outer space for the first time for the meeting to be conducted over real-time video communication via Sophon. She is warned that if there's any unacceptable conversation topics or recording devices, the Trisolarians will destroy the ship that she is on. When they finally meet, Chung-Chin is surprised to see Yun Tianming as a healthy-looking farmer, thanks to the seeds that she sent along. Chung-Chin tries to extract what information she can, but the Trisolarians quickly warn her and realize that she's not going to get any actionable information. It is then that Yun Tianming suggests that they remember the fairy tales that they used to tell each other, despite the fact that they only met in college. Tianming goes on to tell an elaborate story about the Storyless kingdom, where a princess is said to take on the throne, but her brother seizes power by having his painter paint his family into the paintings to make them disappear from the kingdom. The princess is protected by her aunt and an army captain as they make their way to see her older brother stranded on an island that is separated by a sea with dangerous fish. They make their way to the island using magical soap from the faraway land of Shigen Moshigen to mollify the fish. The prince and princess return to the castle, defeat their brother, and the princess takes the chance to travel to the world while her brother rules the kingdom. Of course, the fairy tale was wholly invented by Yun Ming as a means to disclose information vital to the survival of humanity, wrapped in metaphors of a fairy tale as to not raise suspicions of the Trisolarians and protect both Chung-Chin and Tianming. Humanity tries to decipher them, but they ultimately cannot come to an agreement on their meeting, so instead they embark on a new project to try to save humanity, the Bunker Project, whereby they intend to build city-sized ships behind Jupiter and beyond that will protect the people from a photoid attack towards our sun. Another item of kind of follow-up was a question for Amin. So Amin, last time you had said, I'm interested in the spectacle, but not so much the characters anymore. So I feel like this part, especially with the meeting between Chung-Chin and Yan Tianming, was very impactful. And, like it had me really invested in those two characters and just like the circumstances around that meeting and all like the external concerns that put around them. So I guess, did you feel also that impact of that characterization, or you still don't really care about these characters?
No, I guess I don't care about the characters that much more than I did before. I thought the construct of the green and yellow lights while they're talking, I thought that was interesting. I don't know that they necessarily connected, and honestly I didn't care if they connected or not. I did like the mechanism of using the fairy tales to impart information back to humanity. I don't think it was specifically about her. She just happened to be the vessel for it. And so no, I guess I don't care about the characters anymore. I thought I was more invested in the characters of the fairy tales than I was these two characters still.
So you don't care if you're not invested in the story of the idea that they're actually going to meet up again, or
no,
if they could meet up again.
I don't care.
I care.
Yeah, I would say I care too. Yeah, but yeah.
But to what end? They were barely friends in college. They talked once, and now we don't know if he's actually a being or just what his state is now.
Well, I'll say I think I care about their characters meeting up again, only because they didn't really know each other previous to that, but like a lot of people don't know each other until like a very like big event happens in their lives, and this event just happened to be like he died and she shot his brain into space, right? But then like she's pretty much constantly thinking about him since then. And then obviously like he'd always been kind of obsessed with her. So I don't know, the idea of them like meeting up over like this huge space of both distance, time, and whatever the hell else is happening out there, like is, I don't know, I'm interested in that.
It worked for me, and I'm not invested in them as like a couple, and I don't think they're ever going to be reunited again, is my prediction at this point. Given what a kind of sad sack character he was, there's just a bit of a melancholy and a bit of like tragedy, I think, to it. Yeah, this is probably the best character moment, in this book so far, in a series that's not particularly filled with great character moments, at least in my opinion. So maybe it was a low bar to cross, but I did like this part. And again, I don't know what Yun Tianming's fate is from here on out. Like maybe we just never see him again, but I wouldn't mind if that was the case, and that would be a kind of a nice melancholy send off for him.
But do you care if they meet again?
Well, no, not in particularly. Like, I think this would be most effective as if they never did, meet again and like kind of emotionally. I think it would be kind of almost hackneyed at this point if they were somehow reunited and young Min comes. Like I think it's like he's better left as just this slightly tragic character that manages to come around and be impactful to the story and have one last moment with his one-sided lost love.
How do you feel about TMing in general? Like we had an exercise on the spoiler cast a couple episodes ago about who we think is the heroic person. Who's the hero of the story, who's the villain of the story. And I picked up on somebody else who had mentioned on Reddit that I think Tianming is maybe the hero of this story, where he went through probably great personal peril, like to impart these fairy tales. Like there's probably a lot of I perceive there's a lot of danger on his end for if the Trisolarians like did find that he was presenting actionable information to the humans via Chengxin, that they probably would have killed him or done something otherwise terrible. They said they're only going to harm Chengxin, but who knows. So I had always considered he has like this really long plan. He like made up these fairy tales. He published them. He tells like Trisolarian children these fairy tales, and so and it's all in the hopes that he can one day impart this kind of cosmic knowledge, wrapped in metaphors, to humanity, knowing that the Trisolarians aren't going to be okay with him telling them explicitly what's going on.
I feel like they would have to have like a really, really horrific punishment lined up for him, because they essentially saved him for what already seemed like a pretty horrific fate for me. Is his brain floating in space, and you're not sure whether it's like conscious or not. Like that seems worse to me. I don't know if he has like a lot to risk about this, because like he got a sort of second chance to be something or have something, some sort of existence.
I think the way that his character is depicted, especially in his feelings towards Chengxin, is that the greatest punishment for him would be like having to live on knowing that he imparted information to Chengxin that caused her to be like blown up by the Trisolarians.
Yeah.
Like I think that would be the greatest. I don't envision the Trisolarians punishing him simply because he seems to be their greatest tool in a sense to understanding and deciphering humanity. If they were to kill Chengxin for any information that she would have been given would die with her. The only person who would come to harm, to my mind, was always Chengxin. What's remarkable to me about Yun Tianming is that you kind of forget about him after the beginning. He might be in the back of your mind, but you're not really thinking much about him. And then suddenly when he makes this reappearance, you as the reader can surmise how much like character development has occurred for him. And the amount of things that are left to your speculation kind of like it's up to you whether you can paint him in your mind as like a heroic figure, because Chengxin also wonders like the extent to which he may have played a role in the attack that happened, the droplet attacks. So like it's really up to you how you want to paint him, but clearly a lot of character development has happened for him because he's no longer this kind of self-pitying character that he was in the beginning.
And you, that reminds me, you read Redemption of Time, right? Or you read part of it?
Yeah, I read like 3/4 of it.
Okay.
Specifically 3/4.
Yeah. So I'll put a spoiler warning in this thing for Redemption of Time in the chapter markers here. But I remember reading something online. I haven't read it, but I remember reading something online where there was a theory that Yun Tianming was actually the one responsible for all the art that was sent to.
Yeah, that's from that book. Yeah.
Yeah. So. I think we talked about it in the spoiler cast a little bit, and I think that's interesting, but Talia also made a good point that kind of cheapens it too. Like it's kind of cooler that the Trisolarians are able to emulate the human culture and kind of trick them into thinking that we're cool now, rather than just using Yun Tianming.
You know what constantly bothers me about the Trisolarians? Not necessarily bothers, but kind of like just kind of makes me feel tossed back and forth in understanding them is kind of like at moments they're very literal. They're very like they can't understand metaphors. They couldn't lie until recently. And they're very like, to the point.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, like they can create art and they can create art, but then they can't decipher Yun Tianming's fairy tales. So it's like hard to. It's almost like at times I wonder is Liu Cixin using the Trisolarans however he sees fit, whatever works within the kind of point that he's trying to make. Like they can be dumb if you want them to be, but they can be really, really smart if you want them to be. Like that's how it feels at times.
It can also be that like they're not a monolithic society, right? Like we already had like one instance of that with the pacifist getting the initial message, right? And not thinking about Trisolar society, but thinking about like the perfect Earth, right? And so like maybe there's just different factions of people who like humanity more than others, or are able to, they're just individuals. So it could be
That's true.
explained that way.
Yeah, well, this conversation has highlighted one of the stranger things about this series and the way it progressed for me. In that we are halfway, more than halfway into the third book, and we've had very little, very little more, has been revealed about the Trisolarans. I think I expected this, eventually to be like a meeting of two different alien races in a much different way than it has progressed. Like, I realized there was a small section where they talked about, the author explained how they reproduce, where they
Right.
like meld together and then like two like eventually like break off into 3 or 4 other Trisolarans. And it just occurred to me, like, this is the only other bit of like xenobiology we've gotten about the Trisolarans since the first book, in the whole rehydrate thing. So we still at this point don't know what a Trisolaran looks like, anything about them. And at this point, I'm not sure if we're ever going to get that, and if like my expectation of where this series was going to go was like completely off base. But yeah, like as Priya mentioned, there's still at this point kind of a cosmic mystery in a way that like I was not expecting. And for all of the big sci-fi ideas that the author likes to explore in these books, that we've never really gotten much more on the Trisolarans except in this very kind of distanced like fashion. Sofan being your only real like proxy, insight into them. Now we see, Yun Tangming, and like maybe he's, through these fairy tales trying to impart something else about them as well. Although I think well, I'm sure we'll get into it, but I think the fairy tales are more about the cosmic situation as a whole than the Trisolarans themselves. But yeah, it's just surprising to me, like, that at this point we still know so little about the Trisolarans, and now they're off to parts unknown.
So would you prefer to see them described physically, or not prefer to see them described physically? Like which outcome would be better for you?
I don't know at this point. I'd have to finish the series and just see where he's going with it. But that was a bit of a hook for me, at least more early on, like especially maybe at the beginning of the previous book. And my expectations for the series have changed now, but that was a bit of a hook for me, and I'm sure I brought it up a couple times, as I was curious to see what a Trisolaran actually was and what they look like, and maybe that's just not the point of the narrative at this point.
Yeah. Well, we'll see what happens.
I'm sure like there might be some readers who you and I, Dan, talked about this in the interview series that episode that we did, where you were asking me like how I read the books, because I'm not like I love science and I love sci-fi, but I read it more as like a reader of like literature, so from a literary perspective more so. And a lot of this book can be like a lot of hard science. So and especially you see that I was kind of like scoffing a little bit when he in the part where he describes the annihilation of Trisolaris, the sun, and there's like 2 pages where he just describes exactly what happened scientifically to Trisolaris, and he seems to really revel in these types of descriptions of something being destroyed and the scientific forces that cause it to completely and utterly be annihilated. So
it's like the Mercury thing from Diaz too. He talked a lot about that.
yeah. So he seems to really love putting the science in there wherever he can. And so I was looking at this NPR review of the book series, and it says that the fairy tales within this book really show off Lou's virtuosity, not to mention some sparkling, much needed contrast with the heavier sci-fi tone of the rest of the work. And this really resonated with me as a more literary reader of the books, and it was definitely welcome and sort of enchanting, like reading Grimm's fairy tales. And then I was doing some more research on the internet, and apparently Grimm's fairy tales are very widely read in China. So I can imagine, like, I wonder if like he was influenced by, this sort of like childhood fairy tale thing that he himself may have been influenced by as a kid. I don't know. Yeah, so I wonder how the rest of you feel about the fairy tales. Like, what did they add value to your reading experience or like detract from it?
I enjoyed the fairy tales. I thought it was. I agree. I think he does a good job of shifting his tone when he's writing it. It feels more like a fairy tale than it does a science fiction writer trying to write a fairy tale. So I give him credit for that. And I thought the stories were, again, engaging and interesting enough where I was, without even the context of, trying to find the underlying meaning of everything, I thought it was a good set of stories. Like I enjoyed the context. I enjoyed the different types of characters and all of those kinds of things. So yeah, I liked it. It was a welcome diversion or distraction or whatever the word is from the rest, from whatever else was going on.
So was the context of the stories made them more interesting, you think, or
No,
the, the,
I don't think that was it. I think
okay?
the context. So I actually read it. I read them once and I went back and skimmed them just because I wanted to see from the spoiler cast. I think I kind of know what the fairy tales are leading towards, so I just wanted to see if I could pick up on those clues. Otherwise, yeah, I guess I didn't really. The first time I read it, I didn't think of it in the context of the rest of the novel.
I meant more in the context of specifically like we know by the time we read them that they're metaphorical. They're trying to give more information. Did you read it more critically when you first read it, when you're like looking for clues, or did you just read them as stories?
I just read them as stories. Then I went back
Yeah.
to see if I could pick out the clues or the hints or if there were any leading anything I might have missed the first time. Because the first time I just read them just like fairy tales, I guess, like
Yeah.
I would a Grimm story.
I think that's kind of nice actually, because even I think there's a moment where Cheng Xin says that she's trying to memorize these stories and she's really trying to like process them in her brain, but she finds herself at times being so enchanted by them that she just wants to like listen to them as like stories for what they are. And I feel like that's the effect that it has on the reader too at times. Like at times I was like, try to turn your brain off and stop like trying to figure out the metaphors, just read it for the experience.
Yeah.
So you guys have touched on a point that I wanted to bring up about this section, which I did really enjoy, and as Priya brought up before, that he likes to like describe certain parts of the book and and the narrative in excruciating scientific detail, and then at other points we go through these like long, almost like newsreel type sections where he's just like recount, from not from the perspective of any character whatsoever, but we're just getting an overview of what humanity is going through for centuries or something, and the narrative seems very, very pulled back, and then we kind of stop and then focus on this kind of very intimate character moment, and he has this opportunity to kind of like let his humanities classes shine here, in the form of this fairy tale. And I really liked it. My one frustration is that I kind of wish we didn't have this little basically this interstitial chapter between the encounter between Yun Tingming and Ching Xin, and then this chapter that basically tells the reader that these are metaphors. It says that, okay, the groups, stop to sit and read these fairy tales that might save human civilization. And I think it would have been much more effective for me as a reader is if he had gone into the fairy tales and recounted the fairy tales in that chapter as Shang-Xin was hearing them, because like I think it would have been more interesting for me as the reader to, because it is very obviously a metaphor and some sort of cipher for what is going on in this in the solar system or in the universe. And I think it would have been more interesting for me to like come to that realization as I was reading them than to have that laid out for me before that, so that I was like reading them kind of like looking for these things. I don't know if you know how you guys felt about that, but I would have maybe flipped these chapters here, and that like Changxin's and the other humans in this case, processing of them kind of came after you actually getting to read the tales. I'm just curious as well how you guys thought about that.
No, I can see that. I guess like I kind of like the construct as it's set up, only because like I like the idea of like all of humanity kind of coming together and trying to decipher the fairy tales. That could happen. That could happen also afterwards. But I also like the part of her of Changxin like trying to like remember the fairy tale like in her head, and like the memorization part of it, and then like the kind of simple deception that they try to do. And like when she gets back from the ship, they're like, well, he tried, what can you do? And then they go into the Sofan room and go, all right, now tell me the story. I thought that part was really cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think they could have done all of that. I'm just really kind of like, from the reader's perspective, the sequence of events here in which it's laid out for the reader. Like, I think
Yeah.
like these fairy tales, like say, the like both would have, I think, sort of enhanced that character moment between them. Like, there might be like say that chapter, that chapter ends with Yun Ting Mi going into these tales, and then you get to read the tales, and then you read about like Chengxin's like processing of that, and her the way she took those. Like, I just like as the reader would have like appreciated that kind of like being able to realize for myself that these were metaphor, and I think that would have been a cooler way for me to experience them than to be told they were metaphor, then you're getting to read them with that context. And it's just a minor complaint that I have.
I think I read somewhere that the reason the stories are placed in the book exactly the way that they are is one way that the author kind of gets around the problem of a character, of like it's more of like a narrative device, where if you have a character telling a story to another character, where other, like, now he has created characters who are going to say things to one another, and he is a character within the story, it makes it very complicated to create that structure in real time, if that makes sense, like what I'm saying. Like, Tianming said this, and then he like, it kind of pulls you out of the story. If you go back to Tianming in the middle of the story, it seems to be a way for Xijin to kind of avoid some of that structural confusion. That I was reading a review of it, and that's what the review said, and I kind of agree.
Well, I think we do go into this situation with them meeting, that with the expectation and the context that this is supposed to be some sort of exchange of information, and it is very dangerous, and we have that context. So I think that would have been enough context to go into the actual accounting of the tales of themselves, to realize, oh, for the reader to go, oh, like a light bulb turn on in their head, in the middle of reading these, that this is how he's doing it. Oh, cool. Rather than like, I still think it would have worked personally and been a little more effective for me.
I think it's definitely more cinematic, like when they actually do film this part, if they ever get to it. I think they'll almost certainly do it that way, where they have this meeting, and then all of a sudden, like, we shift to the world of the fairy tales as they're telling it.
Sure. Yeah. And then you kind of have like,
Yeah, but maybe the structure of the book just maybe lends itself to having it's separate. I don't know. Like, I could really see either way. So for me, I mean, I've said this a couple times. I don't think I said it on the main show, but like, this part is my absolute favorite part of the entire series. Like, there's other really cool stuff that happens later on in this book too, but like the melding of like the super deep metaphors plus like the character moments here just like was mind blowing when I first read it. I also like how the fairy tales themselves are. I think Priya also mentioned this. Like, they're written in fairy tale style, but like they're very scientific on the as metaphors, and then like the way they kind of decipher them is also very scientific. They have like this big bored with like, and they kind of throw in some like English people just to, like at the last moment as like an afterthought. They're like, let's bring some English people, they can help us out. But they initially thought like they probably had like, you know, generals and, you know, and other scientists trying to decipher it. Anyway, like this part, like, you know, like I've mentioned more, it's my absolute favorite part of it, of the whole series.
I love the English people being just an afterthought.
Yeah, and also like remember that they're saying like, Tian Ming, he has an undergrad, he's not that smart.
And that too, I think I also love the fact that like when they're in the Sofon free room trying to decipher, it's the literary person who gets up first, and they're like, "Sorry, but it's impossible to decipher." Like from what I know, you can't decipher metaphors that could have multiple meanings simultaneously and are ambiguous enough that they could actually mean anything.
Right, especially if, you know, it's something as consequential as like the saving of the universe or the solar system from a extraterrestrial strike.
Right. That brings me to the next point that I had written down here, which was that like the book, I was reading a review, and it brings up the subject of being genre savvy. Genre savvy probably would indicate like you're looking at all of this from the perspective of like sci-fi, and the book's mocking of people as unable to presume or unravel multiple levels of metaphor seems like what one says when they know the answer to their own riddle and can't figure out why literally no one else can figure it out. And asking people to unravel multiple metaphorical layers is tough, especially if your poets aren't physicists and your physicists aren't poets.
Yeah.
Which is like the crux of the issue with these fairy tales, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, the post-processing chapter after this, you know, where he goes into how people are attempting to decipher this, was kind of a relief for me, because you know, at the end of reading these fairy tales, like I had my ideas, but I was asking myself, am I supposed to know, like does he expect me to know what's going on here? And it was kind of a relief for me to, you know, for him to say, no, because the top minds are on this, and they have not been able to decipher it either. So like I was wondering at that point if I was, as the reader, was supposed to like be able to figure out what was going on here and what the metaphors meant. So
Yeah,
I totally
he
had
gave
the
me that
same.
confirmation right away.
right.
So I appreciated that.
Yeah, I really wanted to understand them, but like I definitely did not, and you know, I still don't. I mean, we have a bunch of notes that we'll go over later, about like our ideas and stuff I've collected online, but like there's no like one true document of like this means this and that means that, and yeah, I think
Oh
that.
wow, that's to me that's almost a spoiler, because I'm not sure, you know, like I'm not wondering if, like, my expectation for the rest of this book is like, do we learn that, or do we figure that out?
So I'll say we learn more. I won't get into. I
Okay.
mean, like we learn more than we think that we know right now, but like I won't
Okay.
get into what or that stuff. But like I'll leave it at that.
I'll also say that one moment that I loved is where the literary analysis person who kind of throws his hands up in the air says, "But I will say one thing, that he's really good. He has a really great imagination. He's really good. He's constructed the story really well." Almost felt like Lucy Shin giving himself a little pat on the back.
That was my exact
But,
thought, right?
yeah.
There's like this
Yeah,
meme
cool.
that people always post on the Reddit, one of like Barack Obama like pinning a medal on himself. Like that's like Lewis Shin talking about how good his fairy tales are in the context of the book.
I mean, can you imagine if you're like a sci-fi writer and you just like wrote these like this fairy tale and you're just like, oh my God, did I really just do that? I deserve to give myself a little bit of credit within the text itself.
So yeah, like one of the main things about the fairy tales is it's all wrapped up in trying to decipher Louis G's original question of the cosmic safety notice, right? So there's a lot of interesting stuff that happens around that. I like, again, like just humanity being dumb and like misinterpreting like how they're going to do it. Like some of their solutions are like, let's all be farmers, and then like no one's going to think we're dangerous, or let's make everyone dumb except the people who are making the nano suppressors, of course, and then the automated self-destruction. Like if we get too smart, we're going to just blow ourselves up. Like anyone in the universe is going to like look at, I mean, like the whole thing Sofan says is like, they don't care about you. They don't care about your planet. It's all about economics. Like they just use the most like energy efficient thing, and they just throw a photoid at your sun and then it explodes, and then they don't have to worry, but they don't even look at you. I think it leads to like an interesting question: is like, is there any possible way that you could broadcast to the universe, and given the nature of the dark forest, that I think we now all can agree that is true, or at least in the context of this book, is true, right? As given that Trisolaris was destroyed like pretty quickly after the coordinates were sent. Like we only saw it a little bit later because of the took 4 years for the light to get to us. But is there anything that, I mean, I guess it's really only a question for Tim because maybe as a spoiler later, but like, is there any notice that we could broadcast to the universe saying that like we're not dangerous that you can think of?
No, honestly, yeah, I don't really have an answer for that. Yeah, I don't know. I don't really have a good answer for that question. I don't know. You know.
Yeah, I don't think anyone knows, right? That's the problem, and it might not be knowable because just given the dark forest nature, like any noise that you make is going to be suspect, and like they have that the change of suspicion thing, like, well, you said you're not dangerous, but how do I know you're not lying? So I'm just going to destroy you just because it's easier. So I think those kind of things are at odds, right? Like there's not really a solution there.
Yeah, I mean, we just don't know the nature of it, and that's what I'm assuming at this point, that the fairy tale is trying to clue in humanity to some aspect of, or the nature of what's going on in the dark forest, or the universe at a more macro level, beyond the conflict between the Trisolarans and Earth. So like my prediction is that it's what the rest of this book is about. And yeah, at this point, I don't know exactly what parts of the fairy tale are meaningful in actually communicating that here. But yeah, I mean, I think there's something more going on. Our kind of low level understand, like metaphor of the dark forest. That is like, that's what we have to figure out. But as to what that is, I don't know.
I think one thing that's interesting is that Sofan, when she's asked, how that could work, like the only thing she mentions is escape, right? But then humanity always like puts that down, saying you can't, and that's that crime against humanity, and that leads to a whole bunch of political implications.
Well, she talks about how it's also very how they blew up Troy Solaris is very economical. So
Yeah.
it's at this point has me thinking that there's not necessarily an intelligence behind it, or the mechanism that blows that destroys solar systems is some sort of unthinking like security system that maybe was obviously put in place by intelligent beings, but is not operating on any intelligence, like it's an automated system, which makes it scarier in some ways, and maybe also defeatable for other reasons.
So I also wonder why Trisolaris is so cagey about giving us any information. Like, is it just animus between them from us to broadcasting the coordinates of their world, or is there more danger?
That was my thought as well. Like, I don't, like, why do they care at this point? They're they're off. Why do they care? And if they cared so much, why would they let Yun Tiangmin in on it? Or why would they, educate him in such a way that he'd even have dangerous information to give?
Yeah, because like when he's doing the talk, like he even simple stuff like, oh, the soil comes from meteorites, like the Trisolarans like, no, don't talk about that. And like if there's any like, and they start talking about like the pipes above him, and it seems like he's on the ship or something, and they're like, no, that's the yellow light there. So yeah, they're very careful about I guess they're giving any information about them. So it's interesting why they would still do that. I mean, so also speaking of the question, I mean, maybe you guys will also have an answer for this, but Luo Ji gets the chance to answer the one true question that they're going to answer, and his question is like, can we broadcast this cause of safety notice? And the answer is yes. Is there any better question you guys could have thought of that gives a yes, no, or I don't know answer?
Honestly, no. I think that's I think it's like, I have so much faith in Luo Ji at this moment. Like he is like the brains. Ever since he figured out dark forest theory, he can do no wrong. So I feel like he asked the most important question of all. And it also brings me back to like we were talking about before, where it's like it almost seems like the more impossible the problem, the wilder the theories become on how to solve it. So I feel like he sort of set Earth up for that dilemma in asking that question, but I feel like that is the question to ask if you're told that you're only going to get a yes, no, or I don't know answer.
Yeah, I wonder how he even came up with it, right? Like, I mean, I guess sitting facing a wall for 60 years, like you think of a lot of questions that you would ask them. But yeah, like maybe it's like all within context, but yeah, it's very. Yeah, I can't think of a better question either, especially given the parameters of you can only get yes, no, right, or no answer. All right. Well, the one other note that I had that I was just as I was reading it, talking about like kind of long explanations of scientific concepts, I thought was cool. And it, to me personally, maybe it won't be so interesting to listeners or to watchers or readers, is just the process of Changxin making her way to through the space elevator to the ship, and just kind of getting explanations of like what this technology actually looks like. Also the parts where she's going on to the terminal station, she's kind of walking through the different rings and the different gravity of the different rings, and they talk about like how the ships kind of launch out from the edges, but it's holding in the atmosphere. I thought that stuff was all really cool. It reminded me of the sequence from 2001 where he takes the ship up to the station and then takes the ship over to the moon, and then the rover on the moon. I love that stuff, and I could stand for a 1 hour montage with classical music playing behind it of Changxin making that journey.
Yeah, it's good space logistics and things about space construction. It's part of the reason why I like The Expanse so much, is that it goes into that in great detail. But I also like the detail that at this point, it seems new to us, but it is actually a very old and very weathered kind of installation and system, where she talks about how like the steps in front of like an old church or something like that, like things are kind of like worn away, and it is like a now kind of a bit of a relic and something that's been used for hundreds of years, and kind of shows the signs of it.
Yeah, and they have those cool propaganda posters on the wall, and they have handrails for people who before they had like the personal thrusters and everything. So yeah, it's like it shows that the world is like lived in, right? And it's like has history.
Right. Yeah. Very cool detail to me.
All right. Well, we're going to get into the meat of this episode, which is the fairy tales themselves. A warning here is that I don't know what I'm talking about, and these are all just guesses that I based off of stuff that I read on Reddit or figured out myself or whatever. And I tried really, really hard not to include spoilers because, like I said, there are spoilers in here, but I'm gonna try to be careful about it. And I didn't put anything that I think is a spoiler in a document, but just fair warning, these things are hard to decipher. So the first thing that I think is interesting to set up as part of the fairy tale is that it seems like Tian Ming has been able to observe Changxin the whole time via Sofan. He talks about how he doesn't explicitly say it, but it seems like he's seen her all along throughout all her journey. So he knows like the context of her life, what she's done since for who knows how long, right? Presumably she's seen the whole Soreholder stuff and the Australia stuff and just humanity in general in the intervening years. And he obviously also has gained a lot of trust from the Trisolarians somehow, or at least like they're same way they kind of have reverence towards Luo Ji. It seems like they have some kind of admiration, or at least like giving him extra leeway where they normally wouldn't, to Yuan Tianming to even let him speak to Changxin, because it seems to be dangerous, because they have all these protections in place. So that's also interesting. But what I did is I kind of broke down each character or concept that are in here and kind of had my idea of what they might be, and so we could just talk about them one by one. So the first one that I want to talk about is Prince Deepwater, which is the princess's brother, who years ago went to an island across the sea, but was never able to return. So this one I think is pretty confusing about who that might be referencing. It could be Yuan Tianming, it might be Luo Ji. I'm coming to the idea that I think it's the ring, because of the descriptions of perspective, and maybe like Tomb Island itself is a 4D space. Like we saw those earlier descriptions of 4D space kind of collapsing on itself. Getting to that island was part of the solution, or at least the initial solution to the problem. So that that's why it kind of leads me to believe that Tomb Island itself is like supposed to represent 4D, and maybe not, and maybe deep water is not the ring itself, but 4D beings or something similar. Because if you remember, right, like we got when we were in the 4D space, like they're talking about lots of perspective of the ring, like rarely changing in not ways that we're used to. Like it was really small and then all of a sudden just popped up, and so it doesn't follow the laws of normal perspective. And so they also said like so regarding Prince Deepwater. He was in exile. When he was little, he took a boat to Tomb Island to fish, but when the glutton fish appeared in the sea, he couldn't come back, so he had to grow up on the island.
So I guess I didn't analyze it that way. I didn't try to find parallels for each characters, but I appreciate your point of view. I didn't look at it that way, I guess.
So when I initially read it, I couldn't really parse the characters into like concepts and stuff. And also, I think that each of these characters might be kind of fashioned after a character that we know, but also is representing a scientific concept of some kind. So it's like multi-layered metaphor. It's a complex metaphor essentially. It's hard to kind of pinpoint exactly what it is. You could be like, this is evocative of the ring, but it's also this concept. And I was actually compelled to reread the section on the ring after this because there's so much language scattered throughout that portion of the book that comes up in the fairy tales. Like, for instance, when they're approaching the ring, they say, due to the extra unmeasurable dimension, visual judgments of distance were completely unreliable. The ring might be as far away as an astronomical unit or as close as the pinnace's bow. A similar thing happens when Isan tries to fight Deepwater in the end. He can't tell how far or close he is. Like a lot of the language in the ring just seems to echo so much in this portion. So I really do agree with you, Dan, that it seems to Prince Deepwater seems to have connections to the ring and four-dimensional space. And also Tomb Island, the ring describes itself as a tomb, which was also a place of refuge for higher dimensional beings, it seems. And the island is sort of a refuge for Prince Deepwater because no one can get to him there and he can't come back.
Right.
So yeah.
And then the sea is like full of these glutton fish that they destroy anything that comes to it. And so like that kind of reminded me of Dark Forest Strikes, right? Like anything that they're trying to cross that barrier. Like
right, like these predatory beings that might be scattered about anywhere, and since they're dark, you can't see them,
right,
and they could strike at any time.
Right.
Yeah, I had the same feelings about Prince Deepwater. He was the only character out of the characters in these that I did make that, like, because of the way he's sketched, that I pinned, that he was supposed to represent, possibly the ring or these four-dimensional beings. And I think, like, dimensionality is, plays a big part in these as well, not only with Prince Deepwater, but also with the painting. So, I don't know if that's a metaphor for shifting from 3D to 2D space, or just what we kind of like learned prior with the ring, in that like shifting down, in dimensionality, kind of leads to the death of that being in a certain sense. So I think, both him and the whole painting mechanic ties in pretty deeply into the dimensionality of the universe as a whole. But yeah, I also saw, like the glutton fish as possibly representing the dark forest, or like I had said before, maybe the mechanisms of the dark forest. And he had the fairy tale had tried to explain how the glutton fish came into being. So I think it's trying to drop clues about the origin of it. What that origin is wasn't something that I was able to decipher here, other than it almost seems like it might be like a mistake or something gone wrong, like you introduce a non-native species into an ecosystem that can't handle it, and maybe that's happening at a cosmic level here.
Yeah, I think that was also a really interesting point too. Is how they came from a faraway land, and then something happened, and then those glutton fish were introduced to the sea, and then they all started proliferating, right, and like eventually took over the sea and cut off all communication, or cut off all travel between communication. But yeah, they were not able to go off of the island itself to anywhere else, to the point where like they don't even know if there's anything else out there. Like the princess is like, well, there's only 2 islands. There's this one and the other one, right? There's nothing else. And they're like, no, it's like full of everything. So
yeah, it leads me to believe at this point that the whatever causes the dark forest paradigm the universe is in didn't have maybe intentionality behind it and was maybe a big cosmic mistake or blunder by some progenitor race. That's the part of me that played all the Mass Effect games that is coming to bear here.
So then we have the other prince, Prince Ice Sand, and this one I'm not too sure about, but I was thinking, well, Prince Ice Sand, he's kind of known for a ruthless appetite for power. When he was younger, he used to gather animals as subjects and like behead them if they disagreed, and he's willing to kill he's willing to kill his own family for power. So I was thinking, well, maybe this represents Wade, or maybe this represents humanity as a whole. I was thinking probably humanity is probably a better answer, only because like it seems like when we're really like young, like we're ruling our own kingdom with like without knowledge of like stuff that's happening outside of our little solar system. That's what got me thinking about that.
It also seems to kind of fit with representing humanity at a time when, or at the time when we had the Earth Trisolaris organization that was trying to basically cripple our own species for the sake of I don't know. It felt like ingratiating themselves in the eyes of what they used to call the Trisolarans the Lord.
Yeah.
So it seems like it's almost like they had kind of made a deal with the devil, sort of. Kind of like Prince Iceland, because he knows what he's doing with Needle Eye, the painter. He knows that he's like kind of sacrificing his own family for power.
Yeah, that's interesting.
That's interesting. Yeah, I didn't take Prince Ice Sand as a metaphor for humanity. I wasn't sure if there's any like actual metaphors for humanity in here, because again, my broad overview or theory of this is sort of a cipher trying to clue in humanity to the state of the universe or what's going on. So I kind of took him as, I don't know, maybe being possibly the enemy of whatever race of beings the ring is, or I mean, and again, I'm drawing a much more like literal, because he's the enemy of Prince Deepwater here. That I'm drawing a much more literal like connection here.
Yeah, and it's a pretty. I mean, if it is supposed to represent humanity, it's a pretty grim representation of humanity too, right? Like, there's no redeeming qualities. Deceitful and murderous, and like just looking for power. Like,
sure, yeah.
But Tian Ming, this is also coming from Tian Ming, who doesn't
Right,
have a good. He also didn't. He was the one who wouldn't pledge allegiance to humanity. Before they sent them. So.
Right, that was going to be my next point, is that maybe this is just his own personal view being filtered through here. Like in reading this, I sometimes had to pause and, because I would forget that this is coming from him and not just necessarily like a good faith series of clues to help humanity.
Right.
And then it might not be that.
Okay, well, next we'll go into Princess Dewdrop, who I think is, I don't know, I think this is maybe the easiest one, is supposed to be Chengxin, especially coming from the perspective of Yin Tian Ming, who presents like this really, like, all like the birds stop chirping when she comes around, and she's really delicate, and I think that one seems to be the most transparent, but I'm willing to listen to other ideas if there are. And I know, Priya, you had some notes on her.
Yeah, it was so apparent, because there's one element to it where he kind of like romanticizes her character the most, and I think that's coming from that old feelings that Yun Tianming always has had towards her. So I think that's the big tell that that's definitely Changxin. And I think speaking to Changxin, finding that the character Princess Dewdrop is written to be like very delicate, and she doesn't feel that she's that delicate. It's interesting that when she was about to kill herself in the earlier part of this section of the book, Liu Cixin mentions the word dewdrop, and he writes, "If a world could turn into dust in the snap of a finger, then the end of a person's life should be as placid and indifferent as a dewdrop rolling off the end of a blade of grass." And so it seems less that he's speaking to her delicate nature by naming her dewdrop, and more of like this placidness with which she's going to have to conduct herself going forward, because now she has this new responsibility to kind of save all of humankind in a sense. Like that's kind of the position where she finds herself in, even if it's just as the vehicle through which his story is brought to all of humanity.
So as you're talking about that, that reminded me of something, or maybe gave me a thought. So I wonder if, like, Yun Tianming is constantly probably watching Chengxin all the time, so he would have seen that. So maybe he saw that was happening, and then he instructed Sofan to say that they want to meet, and that's why it kind of happened. It seemed like a little bit too. What's the word I'm thinking of? Too coincidentally, right? Like she's just about to kill herself, and it's like a movie cliche to like, oh, right before that happens, like something happens to like change your mind, right? But maybe that'll happen because Yun Tianming is like watching her.
Oh yeah, totally.
Yeah,
Because the Sofans are everywhere, so
right.
yeah, it stands to reason that that's probably what happened. And I should add that it's not creepy at all that he's always watching her.
And they had another. Remember on I think it was like Blue Space, where the other guy was like always watching the other girl on the other ship, or I think they're on Gravity, and he was watching somebody, the other like navigator on Blue Space, which never goes anywhere.
Yep.
Yeah, so like we already have that
A
thing kind
degree
of
of
set up.
creepiness in all men.
Yeah, I mean that's a common theme throughout the whole series, right? But but yeah, like that particular of kind of monitoring women through Sofan has been a theme, I guess. So yeah, I just put that together, but maybe I should have put that together earlier, but it just clicked up with me. And another thing that I'm thinking of, as also you're talking, like maybe Dewdrop is supposed to be like personified by Chengxin, but maybe it's like the kind of opposite of Ice Sand, where it's the better part of humanity. They're kind of fighting against each other. It's not just one person, but it's like humanity is more optimistic and exploratory spirit, that kind of thing.
Right, because we always have after every major event, he kind of always breaks it down into showing all the different factions and schools of thought that form around a certain conflict.
Yeah.
So yeah, that definitely makes sense.
All right. Well, the next one we had was Captain Longsail, and that person that travels with Dewdrop to protect her. He's from a faraway land. The only thing I could think of was maybe it's supposed to represent AA. She's from a faraway land, in that she's from the future, is comparative to Chengxin and Yun Tianming, and she does her best. she's probably the biggest protector. She's the dasher to Wang Miao of to Chengxin, where she just constantly protects her from herself and her surroundings.
Did he even know who AA was? Did he know about her before?
He wouldn't have, but he would have seen her through the Sofans. Yeah. That was, I mean, again, it might not be completely analogous to one person, and that might not even be her. Like that was just my trying to put line them up on a spreadsheet or whatever. I'm saying like this person is this thing, and AA was the kind of first thing that came to mind. I think it's also because I really like AA, and I think I think she's a good protector and companion of Chengxin.
Wouldn't I kind of draw the comparison closer to Auntie Wide, or whatever her name was, to AA?
Could be, yeah.
Because she was the one literally holding the umbrella over her the whole time.
Yeah. They kind of pushed off, but yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good one too.
To me, Captain Longsail seemed immediately like he represented Tianming. because there's a moment where she first has a conversation with Captain Longsail, and there are other clues because he comes from Hershingen Mosigan, that kind of clues me into that too because of my theory of what Hershingen Mosigan also might represent. But for now, what made me feel like it's Tianming is though they travel together for a whole day, she hadn't thought to ask for his name until now, which to me is sort of evocative of how
Mm.
Tianming had meant nothing really to Chengxin, even though they knew each other in college. And she could tell that he was kind of pining for her, but like she never really paid him any mind. Until it came to the point where the staircase program had to happen, and then that's when they thought of Tianming. But just that kind of that dynamic, that conversation that happens between them, and also the romantic element that seems to unfold between them, made me think that he's positioned himself as Captain Longsail, and also he also feels this protective feeling towards her.
Yeah, and they end up the story with sailing off, or presumably going off to faraway worlds together, right? So yeah, I mean that makes sense too.
Yeah, that was like the another big tell for me that they end up together in the end.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that interpretation as well. That's very much how I read it, that he was the author's self-insert here.
The author of the author of the story inside the story, and the author inside the
Oh, yeah, right.
So the next thing was, we talked a little bit about the Glutton Sea. So I think, yeah, I think that's also kind of clear that it's the dark forest space. I think the more interesting part is that the sea can be pacified by the soap, whatever the soap is supposed to represent, to safely cross it. So that's kind of implying that there is some kind of cosmic safety notice, possibly saying you can use the soap to pacify the dark forest.
Yeah, that's definitely how I read that. That the soap or whatever it is the key here. It's the, and I don't know if it's a literal substance or what what the metaphor is here, but it seems to be that, like, I just loosely interpret it as the secret, or the perhaps like hidden aspect of the universe that humanity has not unlocked or come upon, or needs to tech up in order to be able to understand or utilize in order to figure out how to navigate the dark forest or prevent any dark forest attacks on them.
I think the one clue that I picked up, I mean, well, one of the clues I picked up was that they talk a lot about the soap bubbles, and there's a lot of other talk about soap bubbles previous to this around the four-dimensional
Right.
pockets. So maybe it's supposed to represent something like that, like maybe using four-dimensional fragments to safely navigate the dark forest. Because they also talk about, like, well, when they enter the four dimension, like the Trisolaris probe, it's not dangerous, right? Because
Right.
like a third dimension being is not dangerous to a fourth dimension being, because the fourth dimensional being can just reach in there and muck around with it and kill it, right? So maybe that's what that's supposed to represent.
But also begs the question is if the Trisolarans can manipulate things up to 11 dimensions or so. It's like,
Yeah,
why haven't they figured this out, and why are they still sitting ducks for
right.
the dark
Yeah, like
forest?
why didn't they happen to I mean, like, they should know about, dimensionality, like they're able to unfold protons into
Right.
enfold and unfold protons, so why can't they use four-dimensional fragments or protect against it? So the next thing is the umbrella, and I'll just say I have very little idea, without I have some spoiler ideas about like what that might be, but like I really don't know. Like that's one of the bigger mysteries. And even looking around online, I couldn't find a really good answer. I found some interesting ones that again are more spoilery. I don't know. How about you guys? Any thoughts around the umbrella? I mean, it's a very integral part of the story, right? It's one of the most integral parts of the story. So I think figuring out what that is going to be key to figuring out the fairy tales, I think. But I was never able to make the definitive connection myself.
Yeah, it's the aspect that you have to, of spinning it, and that if you don't spin it, it breaks down, and that it needs this constant maintenance or so. Seems
Yeah.
to be the interesting part to it. I don't get the whole dragon part, or what that's a metaphor for, but the mechanics of it seem like they're important. But beyond that, I don't know.
In rereading it, I found it interesting that so there's this abyss dragon who can't be painted, and the only other character who shares that same characteristic is Prince Deepwater. He also cannot be painted. And like abyss dragon is kind of a peculiar name. Like the only thing that I can think of as an abyss, what you would think of as an abyss in outer space, is like it made me think of a black hole. But then, of course, I couldn't connect that to how that would be helpful in any kind of way because black holes are generally not helpful. But it's interesting that he could fly as well as swim in the deep sea, and then deep sea would probably refer to maybe deep space, and that the umbrella is made of this dragon's body part. So whatever force the umbrella is wielding is probably whatever it is that prevents both the dragon and Prince Deepwater from being painted into a painting. So yeah, to me, that seemed like the biggest clue as to what the safety signal might be, but at the same time, the most confusing and impossible to decipher.
I think that reading of that can be painted is important, and then the fact that the umbrella is made of parts of that dragon that can't be painted is also important. But I don't know.
And also the fact that it's very specific about the type of motion that and the type of materials that it has to be made of. Like if you put any foreign material of any kind into the umbrella to kind of make it stay up by itself, then it breaks down, it doesn't work. And then if you spin it too fast or too slow, it also doesn't work. So yeah, it's like he's trying to really tell you something, but you can't figure it out. It's like it's a really confusing riddle.
Right. And speaking of confusing riddles, so we also have the snow weave paper and just painting people into pictures in general. So this is gonna be a tough one to talk about. I don't know. I guess I don't have a really good way to talk about it other than it's very consequential.
For spoilery reasons, you're saying?
That, and also I just don't fully understand it, I guess. I mean, I think it's supposed to maybe just represent dark forest strikes in general, that's my guess anyway. Like, so maybe they're supposed to represent the photoids.
Well, yeah, again, I interpreted the whole painting. Oh, I'm sorry, you're talking about the snow weave paper.
Yeah, the paper and just painting. I mean, because like they're kind of connected, right? I mean, they are connected.
Yeah, I mean, again, I took it as a metaphor for shifting down into a lower dimensional being, pretty much fatal or effectively fatal for something that, exists in another dimension. Like I took it as a, almost direct metaphor for the ring and those beings and the sort of decay of their four-dimensional space essentially killing them, whereas they explain in the fairy tale that when the king is painted, he essentially still exists in a certain sense, like because he still like causes like an imprint in their bed or something like that, as if he still exists, but he is effectively no more. He's just this just image on paper and exists in some sense but is effectively dead, which is again seems like a direct metaphor to the state of the ring or whatever those beings were.
So to me, the biggest clue was how again comes from the chapter on the ring, where it says, like when I went back and read it, I these words stood out to be more after reading the fairy tales, because they literally describe three-dimensionality as synonymous with fragility, and viewed from four-dimensional space, it was like an unrolled painting, defenseless. So there are parallels between paintings and what three-dimensional space looks like to a four-dimensional being. And there's also this detail about Needle Eye mentioning that he had to paint his teacher, Master Ethereal, first so that he would not paint me first, which reminds me of the nature of like dark forest theory, which is that those who strike do so to eliminate any civilizations that could pose a threat to them without really thinking about it. And I guess they just exploit a fragility that already exists. So it was kind of just evocative of those ideas to me.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I also wonder like what the relationship is between why the paper can only be flattened by the obsidian from Hiroshige Moshigan. Yeah, I mean, like we can get into that part next, but I'm guessing that like that place is supposed to represent 40 space. So like, why can only 40 space flatten these papers? I don't know.
And also, I kind of in rereading the ring chapter, I also found it kind of peculiar that the ring says that lower dimensional beings do not pose a threat to higher dimensional beings. So like higher dimensional beings are not interested in striking out lower dimensional beings. So it's kind of like confusing to me that it's almost like at times it feels like dimensional beings are kind of pitted against each other from this story, but then the ring says that that's not true. So that kind of threw me off a little bit.
Yeah, I kind of saw it as like it seems like there's something out there that wants to prevent a race or a civilization from achieving the fourth dimension or being able to manipulate dimensionality, and maybe that is the threat, and maybe that is another 4D race, wanting to keep 3D races. This terminology is sounding really goofy right now, but from like ascending into their space, that's kind of how I took it. But yeah, I don't, and I'm impressed at your pronunciation of this, but yeah, I don't know exactly what Hershingen Mosakin is at this point, other than it seems to be like a linchpin of some sort, or deciphering that, or what that means seems to be the like Rosetta Stone to figuring out the rest of this collection of metaphors here.
So speaking of pronunciation, so I learned the pronunciation by listening to the audiobook. Again, I read it the first time, but I went back and listened to the audiobook. But I also thought that they also talked a lot about like how when they go to the deciphering part of it, they talk about like, oh, it's actually just like literally like it's not like a Chinese word. They just talk about how it's like like literal characters that they're going over, and it's very strange, and that's why. One, because they repeated it a lot, and two, because it's just weird that she remembered it. So I went back and looked what the Chinese translation was, and I have someone to pronounce it for me because my Chinese is not great.
赫尔辛根莫斯肯
So that's what it is in Chinese. So yeah, like my only idea was that it's maybe the fourth dimension. Like I think, yeah, like it's the faraway land. It's the place that they need to get to for where they all like these cool items come from. The cool and dangerous items. I guess gluttonfish came from there, but the soap also comes from there. Long sail comes from there. So yeah, my main thesis, I guess, was that it's supposed to represent the fourth dimension.
Yeah, or just alienness in general. Like this is a concept that is not easily understood from a human context, perhaps, or it's trying to communicate something that we don't have language for yet. So maybe that's why he had to like resort to this word or whatever, like whatever it represents. But I kind of took it as something that is very alien, and very, again, we don't have the language to describe it, so it is just this seemingly is gibberish at this point.
I took this as a way for him to introduce other elements. So we haven't heard all of the fairy tales that he told. So there may be other clues and other fairy tales where he can use words which just so you could use different types of language and not just all Chinese words to be able to tell these stories, just to keep the Trisolarans off his tail, or also it could just be something that he did just to again let the people on Earth know that there's another meaning in here. Not that that necessarily has a meaning, but it's more like the, I don't know, canary in the coal mine, which is a sad analogy, but really just when you hear this word, it means that there's more than one meaning to this. So I don't know if this gets explained to us further in this book, but that was kind of how I took it. It was just something, if we heard all the fairy tales, would make more sense to us.
I think in the scope of the narrative itself, I mean, in terms of metaphor, it's probably very loaded with meaning. But in terms of the narrative, to me, It seemed that the Storyless Kingdom was kind of like a stand-in or a metaphor for the Earth, and at times it seems like Hershingen Mosekin is like Trisolaris. Because in having stories, they kind of have all the information and clues as to what's going on in the dark forest, and like they definitely have more insights than people on Earth do. It just represents the Storyless Kingdom. On the other hand, represents like Earth at a point where, like, before story came to Earth, or before they got information about the nature of the dark forest. And kind of like the clue to that for me was that every day countless ships passed between the Storyless Kingdom and Hershingen Mosekin, which could be referring to the ships that are coming from Trisolaris. And also the flow of like information, art, and culture from Trisolaris to Earth seems similar to the way that, and this is all when Captain Longsail, by the way, is explaining to Princess Dewdrop the history between the Storyless Kingdom and Hershingen Mosekin, and how the Storyless Kingdom wasn't always without story. So it kind of seems like the two locations are kind of set up possibly as Trisolaris and Earth. That was my initial reading.
Yeah, I like that. I think that definitely makes sense to me. Yeah, because all the cool ideas and all the ideas that are going to save us potentially would come from there, but that's blocked off by the Glutton Sea. And yeah, also there's another quote that said in the very beginning of the story that said, "And so story came to," because it used to be a storyful kingdom, and then it came to Storyless Kingdom. So maybe that's supposed to represent the broadcast that started the era. I don't know. That was the kind of struck out to me.
Right, because I think like it's described as being storyful at first and then storyless. It could represent how it was storyful at the time when there was that era where, you know, we as humans were constantly on edge about the fact that the Trisolarans were coming. And we first came to know and have awareness that we're not the only ones in the universe. And then it kind of went into an era of storylessness. It's kind of described as people became like agrarian during that time. It could refer to how the Trisolarans kind of like stopped our technological progress. Then people kind of became, and then the Black Forest theory was out there, and then people kind of became like, it was kind of like an impasse. So people kind of became complacent and in a state of a lull, and things kind of seemed to be like, you know, days kind of just passed by without any incidents. So that's the shift that it made me think of between from being storyful to storyless, and then it seems to become storyful again in a sense.
Yep. Yeah, it's hard. Yeah, this is again another one of those super wrapped metaphor, double, triple, whatever wrap metaphors that are going to be pretty hard to fully get the idea from. But
it's also one of those where you feel like you can get a little too carried away with trying to unravel these multiple layers of metaphor. You're like, well, this represents this, and then this must be this, and then this must be this, and then you're just kind of like, and then in the end, nothing makes sense anymore.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's a good analog to how humanity processed this in the chapter succeeding this.
Yeah, they just kind of gave up and like, I don't know, let's just build a big bunker.
Well, yeah, they express the frustration that you can go off when there's so many. It's hard to cherry pick what's meaningful versus what's a red herring. But yeah, the Storyless Kingdom part was definitely the most difficult for me to kind of draw any real like meaning or metaphor from, and I think Priya did as good a job as I think you could do with that.
All right, well, one last thing I want to bring up was the soap itself. So I think we talked about it a little bit, but some of the pertinent information here is that it's light enough where it just float away by itself. It causes a lot of bubbles with just a small touch of water and doesn't fade. Like he's able to like cross the entire sea, or the whatever, however long it takes to get to the Tomb Island, by just using, I think, a third of the soap or something. And the way that they collect it was also very interesting. They need to collect it on, you need to run as fast as the bubbles to catch them, and it requires special horses to catch them. So it's yeah, I think that's I don't fully get it, but I think it's interesting. It seems to be this is the mechanism to safely cross the dark forest, right? So, whatever this mechanism is, these things should clue us in on what that is.
Yeah, I just sort of think of them as like, I don't know, fourth dimensional wormholes or the ability to create them, and perhaps Trisolaris holds the key. I mean, if they can create sophons, I mean, again, why haven't they figured this out?
Right. Or why weren't they able to save their own planet if they knew all this stuff?
Yeah, they still, seem bound by light speed,
Hmm.
and the limitation, three-dimensional limitations. So they haven't figured it out, or they're on the cusp of figuring it out. Again, it still kind of begs the question as to why Yun Ming knows all of this.
I think in terms of language, this is also an interesting part where Hershinkin, Mosik, and Soap is described, and he can't help but get into like very technical writing there. That sounds like you're describing like scientific concepts, where he's like, if one were to travel fast enough that they're at rest at the same time as the bubbles. So I was like, yeah, that's at rest. You're describing like a scientific concept there. And throughout the reading of these types of like very clearly scientific metaphors, I was really wondering if someone who's like a physicist would automatically know what this means, or like am I just not able to like, get beyond this barrier of like science?
Yeah. Well, any physicists that are listening to this show, please write in or guest host or whatever. Well, I'm happy to hear your opinions because I don't know. I took physics a lot of years ago, so it kind of went over my head. I know we've gone for a long time talking about this. I could probably go for even longer, and we will on the spoiler cast. I'm sure this will be another long discussion about fairy tales and even giving more context about what we know for the rest of the series. But any other final thoughts you guys want to bring up about this, either the fairy tales or this part of the episode, or things you're looking forward to, or any thoughts at all?
Yeah, I guess I really like this section overall. However, I feel like the cyclical nature of the story beats is kind of coming to bear again here. And maybe this is just a frustration born by my perspective that everybody else here has either been spoiled or has been been able to read it at their own pace, and I unspoiled and reading this in chunks with these stopping points. But again, kind of with the previous book and with the spell, we know that this is something this is significant, and it takes a long time for the narrative to wrap back around to understanding why Luigi's spell was significant. And again, this book seems to be following a lot of the same story beats, just writ larger in a sense. And I guess my slight frustration is like, obviously this fairy tale is going be very, very important for the story. I almost have the meta knowledge that it is going to be important, but now we move into this chapter about the bunker project, and we've seen this kind of time and time again in this in this series, where we get these accounts of humanity's efforts and like various projects going awry. And then so like it just has me wondering like how long, like how much am I going to have to read to here to figure out, get to the point where we learn why this is important, why these fairy tales like were important, because it feels like to me like we're entering into another phase in the story where I'm going to have to read about how the bunker project was tried and failed. We should have just learned from Yun Ming's fairy tales all along. And maybe I'm incorrect there, but it seems like there's just sort of a pattern to the story that's making it feel a little predictable to me.
Well, it's really hard for me to say,
Yeah.
but the good news is that we only have 3 more episodes to go, so that's only like 200 and something pages. So yeah, you'll find out soon.
I can tell you my immediate thought after I finished reading these was is Chengxin going to go into a room and deliver these stories directly to Luoji, who will decipher them in 5 minutes and tell us exactly what we need to know, because he did figure out dark forest theory, so that means he should know exactly what the soap represents and the umbrella represents, right?
Yeah, Luoji is the answer.
Yeah, I was like, why is he not the main character of this book too? Like, I need more. Like, I wasn't done with him yet.
All right. Well, I think we'll wrap it up there. Again, thank you very much, Priya, for joining us for this episode. It was great having you on. It's great for your
Thanks.
insights. Great. Yeah, great to talk to you, and look forward to talking to you more on the Spoilercast.
Same here.
And thank you everyone for listening. Please check out rehydrate.space for release episodes, reading lists, pronunciation guide, and leave any comments by emailing us at rehydrate@fastmail.com or on Twitter @rehydratepod. And please join us next time for Season 5, Episode 5, Fate's Choice, covering the second half of Part 3 and all of Part 4 of Death's End by Liu Cixin.